John Mendez. Wait till you feel the energy of this young man. Born in the inner city, parents, father wasn't around, the mother had issues, was raised by his grandparents, but just the inner discipline and the inner motivation not to go along paths that were in front of him was just absolutely incredible. His personal mission is to enlighten and empower young adults. He mentions one of his first quotes he's ever learned, and where he arrived to that mission, where it is the duty of the enlightened to enlighten those who are not enlightened. He's got so much energy. He took it upon himself to be incredibly well read. His first big book was Rich Dad, Poor Dad. That was a major breakthrough. He decided to go to college and then made some decisions there. But just we get into Ikigai, we get into discipline, his view on discipline, how it relates to organized sports. Absolutely fascinating. Wait till you feel the energy of this young man. I mean, when I say young, he's in his early 20s. It's just, and what he's done, and he's got this great podcast, Walk to Wealth, the number 2. And what he's doing and what he's doing to help is absolutely inspiring. Really enjoy him, and I want to see what continues to happen with. Thanks for listening. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz. People ask me, how did I lose 130 pounds? The quick answer is always discipline. I started my business, wasn't paying attention to my health, was eating too much, drinking too much sweets. My daughter was born. Next thing I know, I'm pre-diabetic, I have hypertension. I knew something had to change. Discipline. I, like many of you, have faced many challenges in your career, in your family, in your life, in your faith. How did you attack them? How did you approach them? How did you solve them, hopefully? It all had to have some degree of discipline. I'm also asked, how did you found and start a tech business that lasted over 25 years? Discipline. I was committed to it, enjoyed technology, didn't enjoy some aspects of it, but knew it was necessary. Discipline. Our podcast mission, how do we use discipline to better ourselves and society? Join me, please, as I talk to interesting people and discuss how they use discipline in their family and their passion and their careers and how it helped them. Our podcast vision, growth through learning from others. Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. It'll be light and serious. Join us, please. Thank you for consideration. John Mendez, what a great pleasure. I really appreciate your time today. So how do you arrive to your mission of enlightening and empowering young adults?
Hey, Joe. Well, first of all, I'm super excited to be here and excited to see where our conversation takes us. So, for me, the enlightening and empowering young adults, it all stems from this one quote that I kind of made my mantra, my life North Star. And it was back in 12th grade of my high school year. And I was in a class, my English class, the only class I actually needed to graduate. And prior to my English teacher getting sick, he would go on random philosophical tangents. Like, I'm talking about out of nowhere, just completely off curriculum. He would just go into tangents. And one of the days we were talking about Plato. And in Plato's allegory of the cave, he talks about the duty of the enlightened is to enlighten the unenlightened. And for whatever reason, that quote stuck. And from then on, that quote was something that I worked on. Every day, how did I show up in the world? Is that quote helped me orient myself and orient the things that I do. And as I started growing in my journey, I was never entrepreneurial in the typical sense where I wasn't selling candy bars. I didn't have the newspaper route. I didn't have the lemonade stand. But it was during the middle of the pandemic when I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And I come from a family that lacks, wealth, lacks positivity, lacks a ton. And so for me, reading that book, it made me realize that there's another way of viewing the world that wasn't being taught in schools, wasn't being taught in my environment, wasn't being taught at my house. And once I realized that there was something else out there, my curiosity took over. So I jumped into the personal finance rabbit hole and started learning. And I was like, sheesh. Now I'm starting up my spring semester of my sophomore year of college. I'm still online because of the pandemic. And it's like I spent this entire winter break learning all about this stuff that was never taught in any of my years of schooling.
Mm.
Yeah, I can't unsee the light. So I decided to my spring semester drop out of college, sign up for my real estate classes, and since then I never looked back.
Yeah, we were just commenting before you were talking to your roommate and he's graduating, so you would have graduated
Yeah,
this May.
this May I would have graduated if I stayed in it.
And but there's still no looking back. There's you talk about not having regrets.
Yeah, I feel like, and when we see all the sci-fi movies and people time travel, and you change one little thing in your past, and then that whole causes a ripple effects, the butterfly effect, and now your entire future, someone dies or something like that, or something tragic happens that you never foresaw. So for me, I love this Drake quote, and it's sometimes I wish I could go back in life, not to change anything, just to feel a couple things twice. And that's something that I love. For me, not having a role model, I always fell back on quotes whenever I needed inspiration or guidance. And that was one of the quotes that stuck with me. And it's not going to change anything. Everyone always asks, like, hey, if you were younger, if you could talk to your younger self, what would you change? And if someone were to ask me, it's nothing. I would just want to experience some of the amazing opportunities I had one more time. That's probably the only thing, just be a little more present. But in terms of changing anything, I can't say that I would want to change anything.
But I need to understand your journey because I mean you come from a forgive my use of language, but a tough home, right? A broken home. Your father wasn't around. Your mother had some struggles. I believe you were raised by your grandparents, your on Dominican side, and it just seems to me that you using these quotes and listening to your professors in your high school and reading Rich Man Poor Man, all these things led you to a path that seems that those in your family weren't guiding you. You fought you got external kind of direction.
Yeah, so similar to New York City, I very much consider myself a melting pot. Like growing
Mm,
up, as I said, not having a role model, it teaches you. I mean, it could teach you to go down the wrong path, but in my case, it taught me how to be open minded. And all the
mm,
time in elementary school, they would always have a question in one of the tests and stuff like that. When it's like, tell us about yourself, it's like, who do you want to be when you grow up? Or who's your role model? And things like that. And I was always filling my grandmother's name just to fill in the blanks. But in all honesty, I never had one. And that was the beauty of growing up because not having a role model, not having someone that I admired so much more than everyone else, it allowed me to take all these different people that have come into my life at face value and implement what I thought was good
mm.
and what I thought would have benefit my life and leave out all the negative and the bad parts that I think I didn't want to be a part of or associate myself with. And growing up and doing that repeatedly over and over and over and also experiencing life and figuring it out on myself as I go on, it allowed me to gain this very open-minded perspective. And growing up in the projects, growing up, my grandparents raised me, growing up on Section 8 food stamps, et cetera, et cetera. I've seen the side of the spectrum where there's a lack of abundance and a lack of wealth. I also was very fortunate to have go to public schools where literally in the same side of town there's people. I went to one of my friend's summer houses in the Hamptons in New York.
Mm.
And for anyone in your audience that may not be familiar, like the Toyota Camry out there is like a Porsche Cayenne. Like that is their Toyota Camry. So they have like stupid money over there. And like being able to see that at an early age was like, whoa, like there's the people who have and there's the people who have not. And it's not just have and have not. There's a giant spectrum in between. And some people, lie somewhere in the middle. And I just so happened to be on one end of the spectrum. And I knew people on the opposite end. And I knew a lot of people in the middle growing up in public schools. And as I said, all these different perspectives, all these different experiences, all these different people and opportunities all kind of formulated together to become the person that I am today.
Yeah, we all don't win the embryo lottery, right?
Mm.
We're born to where we're born, and one podcast recently you said how it's hard for you to complain when you talk about the North Korean dissident, right? That talked
Hmm.
about what she went through in North Korea and how the whole society was just and the hardships and sold to slavery and just horrible. So you really have, but getting back to the other point, you didn't have a role model and you stayed open minded, but you kind of created, you know, all these people into one. You're reading these books. You're so well read. Who told you to read Rich Dad Poor Dad? I mean, that was pivotal. Like you mentioned it earlier.
That is the one part of my story that I've still yet to figure out. For me, during the
Really?
pandemic, if I can remember, and it's hard because before leading up to that, I was working close to almost 70-hour days or so. I was doing
Weeks. Yeah.
working, yeah, 70-hour weeks. There we go. And I was working a ton. I'm working a ton. Like every day, especially in the early beginning of the pandemic, 2020, when it happened, every day felt like the same day for a long time.
Mm.
So it's hard to pinpoint what made me, but if I can go back in the memory lane and remember the points leading up to, I like to call my friend Marcus. He's also the friend that I was supposed to start my podcast with. I ended up starting it solo because our schedules didn't align. But in my timeline, in my story, he was like the John the Baptist. He came
Hmm.
too soon because he told me about Robinhood back in 2019. And I downloaded the app. I got my free stock for downloading the app using his affiliate link. And then the stock was going down. I sold it, deleted the app, and never again. So that was my
Wow.
introduction into personal finance, into investing. He came way too soon. He came way before I was ready. And then fast forward now in 2020, I one of my buddies told me to invest in Tesla. I was getting his college refund, right? Because now I'm heading into my sophomore year of college. I don't have the room and board. I still have financial aid. And one of my buddies, I used to clock out close to 11 at night from the restaurant that I worked at. He would also clock out at his job around that time. And so neither of us also had a car. So we would walk back home in the same direction before we split ways. And one day he was like, "Hey, John, Tesla's having a 5-1 stock split." And I'm looking at him like he has three heads because what's a stock split and what is that? And what does that even mean? Because as I said, I never invested in anything. And he pretty much told me, like, "Hey, you should invest in this." And I don't recommend this to anyone else, but I just took his word for it. And I ended up investing in Tesla using my college refund. And that was like my second step into personal finance and investing. And then from there, I think that's what planted the seed. But I still can't remember what led me to walk into Barnes and Noble and actually pick up Rich Dad Poor Dad.
Wow.
I'm assuming it may be a YouTube video, maybe that's my best guess. But those were the two things that led up to it that I think were the cause that started the whole journey.
You also talk about playing football and the great lessons you learned there and how you grew emotionally.
Yeah, football was one of the biggest lessons, biggest parts of my journey because what football allowed me to do. So one of my girlfriend that at the time was my best friend, she told me about attachment styles. And so for anyone that doesn't know, there's like four main types. It's like secure, anxious, ambivalent, another one that I forget, and avoidant dismissive. That's the one that I was. And
Mm.
avoidant dismissive, for anyone that has that attachment style, you're very closed off. You tend to keep people at bay. You're very good at severing connections, severing relationships. It usually happens when you have a lack of parents in your upbringing. And for me, I started becoming more aware of these different things. And now I was heading into my senior year of football, and now after learning about attachment styles and all these different things, and I started being able to experience more. And I was at a point where leading up to my junior year, my head coach, he went on vacation, and right before the summer conditioning started, he went on the vacation, and like a week later, we get a text from him the week before it starts that he's pretty much resigning as head coach. That was
Wow.
our notification. In high school football, at least in the regular public school, it's like that's everything to us because a lot of the times
Yeah.
these coaches are also our teachers as well. So
Right.
it's like we thought we meant something. This guy goes on vacation with his wife, and he's like, "I'm out," pretty much. So now we're at a point where we don't know who our head coach is going to be. We don't know what's going to go on. So after my junior year, I was convinced that I was going to play senior year. And now I'm doing all this work with personal development and attachment styles. And then my senior year, I wasn't going to play. And then I played spring football my junior and the junior year. And that for me, I was like, man, I really love this. Like, I really love playing. And from there, I just went all into playing. And it allowed me to be present. It allowed me to cry. It allowed me
Hmm.
to be angry, to be happy, to be annoyed, to be tired, whatever it was. But it allowed me to feel emotions and the full spectrum of the emotion, all the colors. My life was very black and white. I had this ego that I don't need anybody. I'm good. I'll carry my own, my own cross, and I don't need the world, and I'm good off of everybody. And if you say one thing out of line, I will cut you off just to prove to you that I don't need you. Like that was my mentality early on in high school. But with football, unless I wouldn't even say unless. I don't think there's any exceptions. You needed those 10 other guys on the field to be with you. It's not like basketball.
Mm,
If you're a stud, if you're LeBron and you're playing high school basketball, you could carry a team. But if you're playing football, doesn't
right.
matter who you are, you
Uh-oh.
need those 10 other guys. And so
Yeah.
it teaches you, it forces you to not have to rely only on yourself. And for me, learning all these different things. So of course, physically, mentally, I grew, but like emotionally, I was able to develop so much because through football, and on top of all the other physical and mental benefits I had, but emotionally, it really allowed me to grow and to flourish. And then coming into college, I was like, man, I'm going to UConn, and no one at the school knows me aside from my roommate and maybe a couple other people. I was like, are these things that I had that were created in order to protect me, but in fact were created out of fear and out of worry that people may leave me? Were those same
Hmm.
beliefs going to serve me now going into college where no one else knows me? And I didn't want to be known as the guy that just cuts everyone off, that doesn't need anybody, that could care less. And for me, I was like, man, I'd rather not hold on to these beliefs because they're no longer serving the person that I'm trying to become.
Well said, John. One of your quotes that I really enjoyed that I had never heard before you said it, but when you're born, you look like your parents, and when you die, you look like your choices.
And that quote to me, I heard for the first time, I think on a Facebook video. Or no, it wasn't a Facebook video. I think it was I was speaking to somebody on a podcast, on my podcast, if I'm not mistaken. I forget. I have too many quotes. I don't really remember where I picked these things
You have a
up.
lot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that quote, it really hit me because earlier on in my life, I didn't really know how to articulate it, but that's always kind of how I lived. I realized, as I said early on, that I came to the realization that once you're of conscious age to make decisions, everything that happens in your life falls on you. Like I realized that pretty early on.
Hmm.
And that quote just worded it so much better than I could have ever worded it. And for me, I was living my life and I didn't want to be a product of my environment. I wanted to be a product of my decisions. And what decisions was I making? And I
Mm.
had to get very, very almost audit myself and start figuring out like, are these decisions that I'm making serving the person that I need to become and want to become? Like Jim Rohn talks about all the time. It's not about making $1 million. It's about the person you become on the way to making a million. And for me, a lot of the beliefs that I created to
Mm.
protect myself out of fear were things that were also going to be the things that held me back. And so I started working on those diligently and really just start reflecting as to where are all the bottlenecks that I put up for myself that, as I said, were created out of fear to protect myself and out of survival. How can I start thriving?
Yeah, you certainly you're impressive young man. The other and I remember learning another thing you talk about that I learned about a while ago, but you brought it back into my life is the Japanese ikigai.
I was doing a lot of soul searching in 2020. So I got into real estate. As I said, I'd left college to get my real estate class. 2 weeks after I turned 20, I get licensed as a realtor. Around that time period, also the same time when my friend Marcus also suggested we start a podcast. I procrastinated on that for a little while, but I ended up starting it around December of 2022. 2021, dropped my trailer. And then in January of 2022, I taught my first social media class to a bunch of real estate agents. I think I had like close to like 440 signups or something like that. And for me, so now I'm in real estate. I'm trying to figure out this social media stuff and teach these classes. I'm also dropping podcast episodes once a week. And I was working at a restaurant still part time to help pay the bills. I was working close
Wow.
to like 30 hours at that time. So it was almost a full time job at that point. 30 hours is like almost right there. And so for me, I was doing all these different things and I was making a lot of movement. I wasn't making a lot of progress. And I was kind of kept finding myself in
Mm.
this cycle of just doing a lot and doing a lot and doing a lot, but not actually making any product progress. And for me, around September of 2022 is when I read this book called The Purpose Factor. And that's when I was like, man, this real estate stuff may not be it. Let me focus on the social media stuff. And then around November-ish, October-ish is when I started Stop and Stare Media. And I was going to do content creation services. And after my very first client, I was like, man, this sucks. I don't want to do this anymore. Like doing it for myself was already a drag. And now doing this for other people is like super drag. So it's like I was not
Mm.
gonna do that. So I pretty much this golden idea that I thought of. Now I had to scrap it out the window after my very first client. And then around that time is when I stumbled across Ikigai. And for anyone that doesn't know what it is, I'll just give you the summarized version. But it's these four circles, and the intersection of the four circles is what you love to do, mixed with what the world needs, mixed with what you can be rewarded for, and mixed with what you're good at, or what I like to say is what you have the aptitude to be good at. When you have those
Mm.
four circles intersect, that's where you find your Ikigai. And so now it's around close to the winter time of 2022, and I'm there pretty much thinking about what on earth is I'm gonna do. And it's when then that I stumbled across Ikigai, and I realized that procrastination can be your best friend if you allow it to be. I
Mm.
had all these phone ringing for opportunities, the podcast, the real estate thing, the social media thing. I was still working, and I had all these different things I could have done. I was trying to have a conversation with all the phones at the same time. And I realized that procrastination, a lot of times people procrastinate for fear, for not wanting to get started, for not knowing what to do. For me, I was taking action, so it didn't make sense. And I started realizing that I was procrastinating with the things that needed to get done because the things weren't in alignment with what I actually was called to do. And it wasn't until I came across that Ikigai concept that it all clicked and made sense for me. And then since then, my podcast has been starting to grow. I've been starting to speak on stages. I've been starting to speak at conferences. I've been starting to open up so much more opportunities. But it wasn't until I procrastinated and realized that this is not something bad. This is just a signal. And it's how I interpret that
Hmm.
signal that made the entire difference. And since then, I've been kind of a little bit on a roll and I'm starting to find my stride a little bit.
How did you develop this uh, intense sense of self purpose and self kind of detection, and it's amazing at such a young age. I'm not sure if I have such a clear vision of myself. And I'm a lot older than you.
Well, thank you for the compliment. It definitely does mean a lot. For me, growing up, as I said, having that open mindedness, it definitely compounds over a long enough period of time. And I genuinely feel like God blesses us all with gifts, and one of my gifts is wisdom. So I always love to quote that the reason I see farther than most is because I'm standing on the shoulders of giants.
Mm.
And the stuff that I spit out is not me coming up with anything that's innovative or anything that's no one's ever heard before. It's, God using me as his vessel to speak through me. And a lot of these times it's like I don't give myself credit for any of the smart stuff that comes out of my mouth. I've been very blessed and very fortunate to meet a tons of amazing people, and I just so happen to have good enough memory to remember all these things and then be able to recall it and apply it to where it needs to be in my life. And not having a lot plus the pandemic gives you a lot of time to think. And for me, probably more than most people my age, almost maybe even to my own detriment. I guess I get in my own head and I kind of live up there for a little while, and there's a lot of lives that I lived already in my head. And
Hmm.
so I think that is the cause for me having this perspective and outlook on life.
Where does you just kind of alluded to it now? Does spirituality play a large role in your life?
Yeah, so it definitely hasn't played as big as a role as it once did, and that's partially because I just been slacking. Full transparency, but
Mm.
I started going to church in third grade. One of my friends, she was a neighbor in the projects that I was living in. She used to go to church, and every Friday they used to have this youth program where they took the kids. And one day she was like, "Hey, John, come to Fun Friday with us." And one day I went, and we played some Mario Kart Double Dash, I think, and they had like the Super Smash and the GameCube, and it was all like a bunch of kids. And then after that, they usually did like some type of Bible study lesson for kids, and then have some pizza, and then we went home. And that led to me eventually going to church. And so I've been Christian now my entire life, but It wasn't until my English teacher in 12th grade that are going philosophical tangents. I wouldn't say that I had faith my whole life, and
Hmm.
he made it apparent because he brought up this pretty much this question, and it was like, "Do you have faith, or are you blindly believing?" And up until
Mm.
that point, I didn't even know that blindly believing was a thing. Like my family was Catholic. I never seen any one of them go to church, but come Thanksgiving or Christmas time, they would all recite prayers in unison, like
Hmm.
nobody else's business. It's like I grew up knowing that God was a part of my family's upbringing, but as I said, I never seen any of them go to church. And so for me, when I started going to church on my own, it was a Christian church. It was a Salvation Army. A lot of people don't know that they're a church, and I started going there. And then my English teacher brought up the question, am I blindly believing or do I have faith? And up to that point, I was just going off of what I've learned in the church that I was in. And through that, I was able to start. I never dabbled in any other religions, but I started becoming even more open minded to what's out there and
Hmm.
other religions and Buddhism and Taoism and all these different Eastern philosophies and ways of life. And realizing that we're all in search of the truth, and we're all in hopes and strongly believe some more than others that we're closer to it than others, and this way is the right way and that way is the right way. And for me, that English 12th grade English teacher, once he brought up that question, I was like, man, I've just been blindly believing. And so I started learning about all these other things, but I always still come back to Christianity. And so that also helped me pretty much stay grounded in terms of, as I said, like I never really drank until I drink once in a blue moon, but growing up, I never drank and I still never done drugs. Part of the reason was having that solid upbringing, growing up in the projects, growing up where the opportunity to smoke, the opportunity to do drugs, the opportunity to be promiscuous is always at your doorstep.
Hmm.
Jordan Peterson, a guy that I love, he brings up an amazing point that being virtuous, you can't be virtuous if you're a rabbit, meaning if you don't harm somebody and you can't harm somebody, that doesn't make you a good person.
Hmm.
It's the lion that could kill you but chooses not to, that holds back his fangs, that hold back his claws. That is what virtue truly is. A lot of people say, I haven't done this, this, and this before, but were you ever presented with the opportunity? And
Hmm.
for me, I always had the opportunity to go left in my life. I have friends that are doing 25 plus years for homicides. I have friends that are making millions of dollars a year selling real estate and other doing, in entrepreneurship. So it's like, as I said, I always had the opportunity to dabble with dance with the devil. And I always
Hmm.
chose to not go that path and to head on this path. And growing up in the church definitely helps ground me and be okay with my journey and know that one of my favorite quotes is, if life was easy, it wouldn't be worth living. God gives his best soldiers the worst missions. And that's one of
Hmm.
the quotes that I also hold very near and dear to my heart, because this path less traveled is definitely a very bumpy road, but it's well worth it.
And where do you how do you attribute to make these positive decisions in your life, even as a child? How do you how do you how'd you do that? Why? It's wonderful.
So they called me Smiley growing up. That was my nickname back in middle school football. And for me, man, I just have an odd case of hyper optimism, I guess you could say. I don't know
Mm.
where it attributes to. I think part of it really stems down to children don't know the difference between night and day. And I say that to say, like, the comparison is a thief of all joy. And as a child, when you're brought up in those harsh environments, you don't know what you don't know until you have something to compare it to. So like for me, growing up in the projects, all the stuff that I went through, like I didn't have in bed until almost my fifth grade year when we finally moved out of the projects. I slept on the couch. And for me, that was just the way of life. That's just
Mm.
how things were. And there wasn't anything bad about that or good about that. It was just that was it. And that's what I was brought up in. So having that as my base level, it doesn't really take much to make you happy when you don't have a lot. And a lot of third world countries, a lot of the people in these third world countries that we from a first world modern society look down on, but a lot of these people are some of the happiest people on the planet,
Mm.
and they have the least. And for me, not having much, I mean, I'm still grew up in a first world country, so I'm very blessed and fortunate and grateful for that, but not having a lot compared to some other people in this country growing up, it was like life was simple and easy and fun for me. And then growing up, I don't think the optimism ever went away. And now it's like to a point where like I think my optimism is getting out of control now because I think no matter what, man, it's like everything is possible. And I genuinely believe that every ceiling that we have to break through was also secretly built by ourselves. Now, there may be some indoctrination or some trauma or some reason that subconsciously is playing in the background that made us build that ceiling, but I think we are limitless. And I think that, we can not fail. We cannot, we we weren't meant and designed to achieve the minimum. Like every living organism grows to its fullest potential, except for humans. Like you never seen a tree that said, "Hey, I think I'm good here. I'm 10 feet tall. I got some branches. I got some apples coming out," and it's like I'm fine here. It's like
Mm.
every possible living organism lived life to the fullest, except for humans. And despite that, we were also the only organisms that were blessed with a conscience. So it's like, a lot of us are not making the most of it. Whether that's a good or bad thing, that's neither here nor there. I just
Mm.
know that in my own personal life, I would like to see where I could take it. And another Drake quote I love is like, he says in one song, it's like, there's no limit to where I could take it. And that's how I try to live my life every day.
No limit where I can take it. You have this great exercise, John, where you ask somebody 3 questions about winning $1 billion Powerball.
Yeah.
Can we
So the three
review that?
questions. Yeah. So I love this question because it's something that really makes you think. And the goal of this exercise is not to come up with an answer, it's to get you
Mm.
in the process of thinking. So for anyone listening right now, if you can't come up with something, definitely don't make yourself feel bad because it doesn't come to mind off the top of the head. But the first question is, you get a call, Powerball just hit. You win a billion plus dollars, right? No tax, don't have to worry about none of that stuff. You now don't have to work for the rest of your life. You are good, you are taken care of. What do you do then? From there, after you spend some time thinking, the next step that you would graduate to is you get a call from your doctor's office. Doctors give you a ring. Hey, John. Man, we just got some test results back in, man. I got some bad news. You only got 5 years left. Hangs up. Boom. You just won the Powerball a week later. Now you get a call from your doctor, and you only have 5 years left to live. You still have $1 billion, though. What do you do now? Then a couple days go by. You get another call. Hey, John, doctor's office again, man. I think we read the test results wrong. We just got some new results. You got a day. What now? What
Mm.
now? What would you do if you just won the Powerball? You have $1 billion and you only have 24 hours left. And as I said, this exercise is not to come up with an answer, but it's to get you in the process of figuring out what really matters in your life and what are those things that you genuinely want to hold on to and do more of and live your life as if that was the way, 24 hours was all you had left. And that doesn't mean go quit your job and, do whatever, but it means like, hey, is this something that is important to you? What are your core values? Live by those. Don't let a day go by. Like one of my friends was talking about, like, hey, I'm thinking about picking a shift next Saturday or, going to my grandma's. Like, go with your grandma. Don't even think about the shift. There'll always be another
Mm.
shift. Right. And knowing that there'll always be more money to go around, especially when you're thinking abundantly. But there's no matter what mindset, personal development book, no matter what you read, there will never be more time that you could get back. So realizing that time is the most precious asset is something that helped definitely me a lot. And it's something that I try to focus on making an impact in the time that I do have here on this planet because I never want to take it for granted. And I also never want to say that I lived a life that was less to my potential or less to what I really wanted to do and what I feel called to do.
Have you yourself answered these questions?
Yeah, so for me, if I were to get $1 billion and die in 24 hours, the what I would do is probably spend the first couple hours or so finding the best like video production slash book writing team I could create. Then I will take virtually everything I have stored up in my head, and for the next like 20 hours or so, So right, that gives me like, yeah. So I'm at like hour 22. I'll spend the next 20 hours like putting it all down in like video
Wow.
and audio, and then probably spend like the last 2 hours coming up with some like insane like Facebook ad campaign to get it out to as many people as possible and use as much of the money as I can to pretty much get that message out to more people, because the money, man, it can be, it's no matter how much you accumulate at the end of the game, it always gets redistributed back into the game. So no matter how much you think it lasts, and the average inheritance only lasts like 3 generations. So it's like always been, I'm one that focusing on generational wisdom and passive impact instead of generational wealth and passive income, right?
Hmm.
Because money is always enough to be around, but if you could put something in a message and a piece of information, a piece of advice, a wisdom, and instill that in somebody else's heart and mind and soul, like they'll be able to do more. And if they were to lose all their money, they'll be able to get it back that much more quickly,
Hmm.
and probably even make even more. So for me, I'm just taking everything I learned through my unique experience here on this planet and putting it out there in hopes that it'll probably help change some lives.
Oh, how wonderful. What a fascinating answer. So on the podcast, John, I always bring up the point where I started my company about 30 years ago now, and I wasn't paying attention to myself. I was working long hours, like you mentioned before, and I was eating poorly. I wasn't exercising. I got myself up to 340 pounds. The doctor said, if you don't lose the weight, you're not going to see your daughter graduate. My daughter had just been born. So it was kind of a come to Jesus moment for me. And I just changed the way I did everything. And over the next year and a half, I lost 130 pounds. And when I tell people this, they always, I could see it in their eyes. They want to know how, losing weight is one of the hardest things you could do. And I always just come back to one word, and that's discipline. I just got discipline. How does discipline play a role in your life, John Mendez?
Yeah, it's definitely something that was instilled in me through football. I believe that everyone should play some type of organized sports growing up. I think it's one, it's super fun. It's two, it's great exercise. And three, a lot of stuff, especially if you have the opportunity to play football. I feel like discipline definitely comes into play because a lot of the training I we do in football, honestly, I don't know if any of that stuff has direct correlations to what we're doing. Like we're doing bear crawls on 100-degree turf up and down. It's like I never ever bear crawled in a game ever to this day. Like I don't recall one single game in my short football career where I ever bear crawled in my life. I don't know who came up with that exercise. Screw them. That's a terrible idea. I hate them. But a lot of the stuff that we do, we know that it'll get us in better shape and get us better, mentally stronger mentally. And so I despise a lot of that stuff going through it, but I know it's all for a bigger purpose that I couldn't see at that time. And going back at it, I can see why the coaches made it do it because it made us tougher. It made us a lot stronger. And discipline is what pulls you through when motivation fades. Because just like any other emotion, motivation will come and go, and motivation is very, very, very overrated. So that's why the term like motivational speaker, I wouldn't ever really call myself that. Maybe like an inspirational speaker or like professional
Mm,
speaker. But in terms of, because words mean a lot. You mentioned it earlier too. Like words are everything. They're also nothing at the same time.
mm,
And that's a whole nother rabbit hole I could probably jump into. But for me, with discipline, football helped me a lot. Basketball definitely helped me out a ton. And it allows me to embark on this journey. And when you can become your own boss, it's the same reason why usually you leave, because sometimes you're not a good boss and you end up having to find another job because you didn't run your entrepreneurial endeavor successfully or properly, and you become your biggest bottleneck. So for me, it's learning a lot of this stuff trial by fire. But that's usually the best way to learn sometimes, because you learn a lot of lessons when you're in the trenches and figuring it out than you wouldn't ever be able to learn in a book.
it's fascinating how you draw discipline to organized team sports. And you don't, I mean, you seem to me, John, to exemplify discipline when you didn't follow the trends of many of your friends in your environment. You were very optimistic. You were incredibly well read. You not only read it, but you took the advice from those books and moved forward with it. Um, you don't really attribute that to discipline. You just attribute that to your personality, your upbringing, correct?
Yeah, so for me, the getting started is that's where motivation and inspiration really come into play. Discipline
Mm,
is keeping it going. So for me,
hmm,
it's I actually struggled a lot in terms of doing what I needed to do. But as I said, partially was because I didn't feel like I was aligned and I didn't know it. But when I comes to doing things that I know are in alignment, for example, like with my podcast, it's like I don't miss. Like I'm doing now almost I'm doing 3 times more episodes as it was last year this time around. I used to do one a week and now I'm doing 3 a week.
wow.
And I rarely miss. And before, and there was this point in time in like February or March where I went like almost like 6 weeks or like 4 weeks without dropping an episode. And it wasn't until my cousin reached out to me and was like, John, what's going on here? That I got back on it. And since then I've been on it. But I was said I was focused on the real estate stuff and trying to get the social media stuff off the ground. I didn't realize it. But I was still dropping episodes once a week consistently, despite me having
Mm,
this podcast on the back burner. And as I said, for real estate, I wasn't doing what I needed to do. I wasn't following up with leads. Acquiring them was a piece of cake. Following up is where I lost a ton of money. And the
mm,
social media stuff, as I said, like that stuff, when I was first starting off, now I am actually continuing the social media stuff, but I through a course now because I love the teaching aspect, which is what I learned. The doing a stuff, doing for you services, done for you services, it wasn't what I genuinely enjoyed doing. Of course, I could have done it and monetized it, but I didn't enjoy it. And my main focus was podcasting. And once I realized that, it was like, why would I spend any more time necessary doing what I didn't want to do? But when you genuinely enjoy something, you have to consider it's like who you're doing it for. And then every day you're not showing up, that's another person that you could have impacted that now may be lost. And it's kind of a very burdensome way to view the world because then you always have this massive weight on your shoulder. But I feel, I genuinely feel that, as I said earlier, that's like God gives his best soldiers the worst mission. So it's like these things that I'm doing now, I know are something far greater that I could actually imagine right now. And despite the road being super hard and like as I said, burdensome, because you start thinking about the guy that you don't even know across the world that probably could listen to your podcast and been impacted. When you start thinking at that level, it kind of can consume you a little bit. So it's a very, very fine line to tread, but it definitely helps get you going and gives you that spark when you need it. Because it's like when you want to slack off, it's like, man, there's one more person I could be letting down. But then also having
mm,
the awareness to realize that if you step on the gas too much, you still got to refuel, and a burnt out version of yourself isn't actually doing that person any service.
mm,
So it's like, as I said, a very fine line to to tread.
mm. Discipline is needed when motivation fades.
Yeah.
Very good. And the other quote you which is similar that I've heard before, that God doesn't give you anything you can't handle.
Hmm.
I guess that's similar to what you said, that God gives the hardest tasks. The phrase "make it till you break it." You're not a fan.
Yeah. No, fake it till you make it is the one
I'm
I'm not a
sorry.
fan of. No
Fake
way.
it till you make it.
I hate that, and I don't use
Yeah.
hate often, but that quote is everything about it, man. I hate the
Yeah.
whole idea. One of my values is honor. One of my core values is honor, and part of being honorable is being an honest person. And I think this is a good part to touch upon what I mentioned earlier or hinted at earlier with the words meaning everything and nothing at the same time. It's
Mm,
like words mean nothing because at the end of the day, they're just letters put together, right? But at the same time, we assign meaning to words. And the words, like if I were to give you my word and you were to not follow through on, or if I were to not follow through on it, my word then to you would mean absolutely nothing.
mm,
Because when you give somebody your word, you hold it to so much a higher esteem, that higher level. And for someone to not follow through with that, so that's why I always say like your word is everything and nothing at the same time because it depends on how much meaning and value you assign to it. And when it comes to this idea of fake it till you make it, it's like you are pretty much promoting the idea of being a fraud, of not being who you are, of not being authentic, of not being. That's why I also love like It depends, but the affirmation stuff, man, that stuff, it's a very tricky thing to navigate because like I want to understand. It's like there's also like subconscious programming and like neuro linguistic programming and self, hypnosis. But it's like don't also blatantly lie to yourself because your
Mm,
way your reticular activating system works, from what I know, is that it's pretty much looking for information and facts and evidence to justify what you already believe deep down within. And so if you're telling yourself in the mirror, hey, I'm 300 pounds, but I look good, I feel good, I'm good. And it's like, or one of the good ones, like, I'm a money magnet, but you're dead broke and your account's in the red. And you're just telling
mm,
yourself that I'm a money magnet. And it's like, man, a lot of that stuff, it's like, just like woo woo motivational stuff to make it sound like you're making progress and make it sound like you're making a change. But in all reality, isn't actually doing anything to benefit yourself because your body deep down within knows that you're out of shape, you're fat, or you're broke, or whatever it may be,
mm,
and your body is going to look for stuff that always justifies what you already believe internally. So until you
mm,
start working internally and changing who you believe that you are, then all that stuff is just garbage, honestly. And you have to first, as I said, realize where you're at and know that when you're starting a journey, and Alex Harmoldi talks about this a lot, but when you start a journey, no matter what it is, usually suck, and then eventually you'll suck less, and then you get to a point where you'll suck so little that you're actually good at what you do, right? But like knowing that starting off, like, hey, it's okay that I suck at this, that I'm inadequate, that I'm terrible, but this is just the first step in a journey of growth. And everyone who was a master was also a disaster at one point in time. So
mm,
don't lie to yourself and say, hey, I'm, a 12th degree black belt if you're just now getting started in karate to make yourself get confident and feel better. It's like, hey, no, I am working on becoming a 12th degree black belt. That is very much real. That is very honest. That is something that's very doable. But lying to yourself, man, I hate it.
mm. Yeah, and that's what really that phrase encompasses. I never liked it as well, and was always dubious of those who kind of promoted it. John Mendez, what motivates you?
Man, I was very, very fortunate to get this entrepreneur bug kind of in my system. But even before that, I was always very competitive. I love video games. I think that's where it stems from.
Mm,
And that would probably, it was an unhealthy obsession. If like talk to me sixth and seventh grade a year. Like there's definitely a couple days where I played video games for like too many days straight, especially those winter break days and the spring breaks and stuff like that. Like days on end, like no breaks except for shower and eat. And I would eat in my room just because I didn't want to go away from the game, especially when they had Call of Duty double XP weekends. You have double weapon XP and also double like regular XP. So not only are you leveling up, but you're also leveling your guns up. And like
mm,
me and the squad used to just go in and torch everybody in Call of Duty. I think that's where it stems from, honestly. And then sports, I was a guy in high school that every day in gym was like the NBA finals. And if
hmm,
you're on my team and you didn't want to play to win and destroy the other opponent, and then it's like, what are you doing here? Like, and it was beyond gym class now because now you're on my team and you're the reason why I'm losing. Now I despise you. I took it to the extreme, so I don't know what that was. And then I got into entrepreneurship and this like personal development stuff, and that same thing kind of just applied to this and just shifted over. But in terms of what motivates me, it's hard to say. But in terms of what keeps me going, I could say is, as I said, knowing that I didn't live up to what I had in store for me kind of scares me. Also,
hmm,
the pain of regret far outweighs the pain of anything that you could overcome or go through in the present day, because the pain of regret also compounds, and conflict
mm,
delay is conflict multiplied. So for me, I'd rather do the do now and get it over with, because hardship is inevitable. You could either front load it or back load it. And I'd rather front load most of it so I can cool off and focus all my time. I wouldn't say cool off. I would say shift more of my focus into what I genuinely enjoy doing. Cause like once this, stop and stare media stuff kicks off, what I genuinely want to do is enlighten and empower young adults. So of course I love teaching and helping out other realtors with their marketing stuff. That's just because I have a skill for it. Right. But I genuinely want to help other young people my age that also want to embark on this entrepreneurship journey. When you grow up inner city, you see a lot of people that don't want to take the traditional path. And as education is starting to shift, as AI is starting to come into play, as personal, courses and YouTube and education and information is becoming more and more accessible, I think a lot more people are going to start taking that untraditional path. And when they get to that doorstep, they're going to need a guide. And I would love to be that guide for them because I was once where they were.
Hmm. So then how do you measure success?
Success is it's a pursuit. It's a continual pursuit. There's no I think people who measure success as a goal, as a number, is if and here's one of the things that I learned from my time spending a day with Gary Keller, who's the founder of Keller
Yeah,
Williams.
billionaire.
And he talks about the difference between a purpose and a goal. And a purpose is something that you're in continual pursuit of. It's something that transcends you. It's something that, similar to Moses in the Bible, you'll never accomplish going to the promised land, most likely. But you live every day knowing that you'll help those that come after you get there. So it's aiming after this thing that's bigger than you, that you probably will never achieve. That is what your purpose is. And for
Hmm.
me, I know that I'll never be able to help all the young adults. Why? Because there's always be more young adults to help, right? And there's going to be more people that are born and more people that come into this earth, and then more people that always need to be helped. A goal is a numerical number. Like, I want to help 10,000 small business owners get to $10,000 per month or something. That is numerical. You can hit that in your lifetime. And that is the main differentiating factor between a purpose and a goal, is that a purpose you can accomplish in your own lifetime, where a goal is. And so for me, my purpose really is to help young people and, enlighten and empower them, as I say in my mission statement,
Hmm.
to build a wealthy, abundant life, because it's something that I had to completely shift my identity to get from where I was. And I'm on the journey now. And I'm not waiting for me to get to the other side to bring people with me. I'm bringing people along for the ride as I go. I think that's one of the big differentiating factors between me and most of the people, is I didn't want to wait until I had a certain net worth number or a certain income threshold to start helping other people out. It's like you only need to be 2 steps ahead of the next person to share a good piece of advice. And if I could help one person out that's, a couple steps behind, that's definitely, I wouldn't say it's more than enough, because helping one person isn't why I do. I want to help more than one person. I want to help millions. I want to really leave a big dent on here while I'm here. And but knowing it starts with one life at a time. So that's kind of why I do what I do.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's reflected in your podcast, Walk to Wealth. Tell us about that title.
Yeah, so as I said, my friend Marcus was like, "Hey, John, let's start a podcast, man. We're always talking about life goals, things we wanted to accomplish. I think other people our age would definitely like it." And I was like, "Yo, bro, that's a good idea." I talked to him super casually. That's my boy. We grew up with each other. And from me, as I said, I was already working, studying for my class. I was doing like close to 70 hours on top of studying for my real estate exam. He was already getting ready to go back to college for his junior year. Our schedules didn't match up, and I was procrastinating. And if you looked at my journal, every Friday I would write down, like, man, the goal for this week is to think of a name, brainstorm a name. And I
Mm.
just completely procrastinated. And then it finally hit me, Walk to Wealth. And that was about 4 months later. And the name means, for the 99% of us that aren't overnight sensations, it's a long walk to wealth. And some people may walk faster than others, but what good is sprinting to the finish line if you pass out when you cross it?
Hmm. Very, very impressive, John. I was so glad when you accepted this. You inspire me. Your passion is contagious, and I feel it, and I see it in your podcast, and when you speak. I really enjoy. Thank you for your time today. How can we get in touch with you? How can we see what you do?
Well, before I share my call to action, from one podcaster to another, you're definitely one of the best question askers and the most in depth hosts that I've ever hopped on a podcast for. So, for one, game recognizes game, and you're definitely
Mm.
amazing at what you do. So, thanks again for the opportunity, brother. And for anyone that found value in our conversation today, you could check me out at www.walk2wealth.com. Again, that's walk the number 2wealth.com. That's where you could check me out on. And I got some pretty cool stuff coming on the way. So definitely keep on touch with me there. And all my socials are also linked there as well.
Everything starts from there. John, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it, and I appreciate you. I wish you success. And if there's anything I can do to help along the way, please reach out.
Thanks again, man. It was a pleasure.
You be well. Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypins.com. There you'll find lots of resources and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Would you like to financially support the podcast? You can go to our Patreon site. Consider $5, $10, or $20 a month. There's all kind of plans that we have there. There's like a one-time payment. What is this podcast episode worth to you? $25, $50, $100, $500, $1,000, $5,000. You be the judge. You can go to our PayPal account to do that as well. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations.